Since I was a kid, I'd often wake up to find my furniture rearranged in ways that were different from how I'd left it. Sometimes it was something minor, like my lamp being in the wrong spot or my shoe rack tipped over. Other times, I'd wake up to find my bed in a different position or my dresser on a different wall. At first, it seemed like just a strange but ordinary way of organizing my room. I have a vivid memory from when I was about 5 years old of my mom yelling at me for moving all my furniture overnight. I insisted it wasn't me, and while she was frustrated, I think she was also scared by the possibility that it wasn't me at all. After a few hours of convincing her, I managed to get her to believe that it wasn't my doing. I was just a little kid and didn't have the strength to move it myself. My older brother, who was 11 at the time, was also a suspect, but he usually pulled more typical sibling pranks, nothing so bizarre as moving my furniture at night. When my brother denied it, my mom briefly suspected my dad, but that only led to them arguing. My mom ended up spending the night in my bed, trying to reassure me without making it sound too creepy, but I could tell she was frightened. I wasn't scared at all. It felt completely normal, even fun, like a big sleepover. The next morning, though, things were different. My mom was wide-eyed and panicking, noticing that my bed was now perfectly centered in the room. It had always been against the wall before. It felt like the room was showing off its ability to rearrange itself while we slept. My mom, who usually claimed to be a light sleeper, seemed genuinely perplexed. She insisted that someone was sleepwalking or something similar. They ordered a camera to monitor my room so they could catch the culprit in action. When it arrived the next day, I had to spend another night without them being able to watch me. Excitedly, I slept in their bed, feeling like I was having another sleepover, sandwiched between my parents. But the next morning, everything changed again. I woke up to find their bed was no longer in their room. It had been moved to the living room. My dad was just as confused and anxious as my mom. He wondered how it could have possibly fit through the doorframe. As he started to dismantle the bed to move it back, he discovered that the screws were loose, with some even missing, as if it had been hastily reassembled. I remember my parents were on the phone, likely with the police, but they never showed up. My mom was frustrated when they wouldn't take our situation seriously. That night, my dad set up a camera in my room again, hoping to catch whatever was going on. He kept the monitor by his bedside as an extra set of eyes. Once again, we woke up to find my room rearranged. But this time, when my mom checked the camera, she found it had been destroyed. Every bit of footage was gone. This was around the time when baby monitors could record to smartphones, but all our recordings had been wiped. Afterward, my family went to the police station to report that someone had been in our home. They took a statement, but that was about it. For the next few years, my parents struggled to figure out what was happening. They tried various explanations, but nothing made sense. My mom started to believe our house was haunted, and eventually, my dad came around to her way of thinking. This belief was ultimately why we moved when I was 8. I was actually excited to leave it all behind. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed with the whole sleepover situation lately. I needed my own space, especially since my parents didn't let me go to day camp or stay over at friends' houses like my sibling did. It was the first night in our new place, just a short distance from our old house, enough to feel excited, but not too different. My parents were relieved about the new home and let me sleep in my own bed. I remember us having McDonald's for dinner on a makeshift table made of cardboard boxes. I jumped up and hugged them, feeling grateful. That night, as I wrapped myself up in my blankets, my mom seemed a bit hesitant to leave me alone, but she knew I needed this independence. My room was pretty bare, just my bed, a dresser, and a few boxes of clothes. I fell asleep thinking about how creaky the house was but felt confident. The next morning, I woke up before my parents, with sunlight streaming in since I didn't have curtains yet. As I stretched, I felt a knot in my throat when I noticed that the furniture had shifted. I realized if my mom saw it, I'd be stuck sleeping next to her forever. My imagination ran wild. I pictured coming home as an adult in a suit, only for my mom to still tuck me into bed. I quickly moved everything back into place just in time to hear my mom's footsteps. I jumped into bed and pretended to be asleep. When she opened the door and let out a sigh of relief, I felt a mix of guilt and triumph. I spent the next month following the same routine, getting up early to rearrange the room before she checked on me at 7:30. Eventually, my mom warmed up to the idea of me going to day camp. That year, it was only a one-night camp, which was fine. I didn't expect anything strange to happen, but when we woke up the next morning, every cot was outside, with kids and adults looking confused. I quickly concocted a story, blaming it all on a fictional troubled kid named Eddie, and somehow everyone believed me. The camp counselors had to explain to all the parents what happened, and I managed to escape any consequences. As the years went by, this became my norm. I turned it into a sleepover trick, convincing my friends to come over, and the chaos would ensue every time. It felt like a superpower, something I could pull off anywhere. But it was exhausting too. Sometimes I'd forget to fix everything, and my mom's concerned face would remind me of the fear I instilled in her. In high school, I got sick and couldn't muster the energy to rearrange my room for a couple of days. My mom was getting worried, so I made sure to wake up before her. One day, she told me she'd be gone in the morning but would say hi when she got back around noon. I was relieved. I could sleep in without worrying about getting caught. I woke up late that day, feeling much better. But when I heard my brother playing video games, I lost track of time. Suddenly, I heard the garage door open and panic set in. I dashed back to my room to move everything into place. Thankfully, I had convinced my parents to buy lighter furniture over the years, making it easier to rearrange. The only heavy piece was the dresser, a family heirloom that felt impossibly weighty that day. I rushed to my brother for help, knowing he'd understand the stakes. He jumped up to assist me, and we hurried to make everything look normal before our mom got home. I went downstairs to distract her, knowing she would be frantic if she found me in my room. My furniture situation was awkward, but the consequences were about to get much worse. My sock slipped across the hardwood floor as I reached the kitchen, just in time to see my mom opening the door. Her cheerful humming stopped abruptly when she made eye contact with me. She set a grocery bag on the counter and began unpacking some soup she had just bought. I expected her to yell at me, but she didn't. Perhaps she was being patient since I was sick. Just then, as she took out a box of popsicles, I heard a terrible sound, a scream from my brother. It was a loud, short cry, as if he had stubbed his toe and covered his mouth in shock. My mom and I exchanged worried looks, and I rushed to check on him. It was too loud to be a minor injury. We turned the corner into my room, and what I found left me confused. My dresser was slightly shifted from where I had left it, the big drawer wide open and empty, but most importantly, my brother was missing. An hour passed, and he was still gone. All the doors and windows were locked. We ended up filing a missing person report. A whole week went by with no sign of him. My mom thought he might be playing a prank on me, moving my furniture to scare me, and that he had gotten scared and run off. I couldn't bring myself to tell her that I felt responsible, as if whatever was moving my things only wanted me to interact with them. After that dreadful week, we discovered something that made everything even worse. My dad was in my room with me, asking about our last conversation, as everyone seemed to do since I was the last one to see him. As I explained it for what felt like the 100th time, he randomly checked the dresser and opened the drawer we had first found ajar. Inside was a note taped to the bottom. Before he could even ask, he knew it wasn't mine. We called my mom into the room before reading it. Here's the exact text of the note. I see our little game of hide and seek didn't end as I imagined. Your brother isn't who I was looking for, but he will do for now. The note sent chills down our spines. Now we knew someone had taken my brother. We thought the police would step up their efforts with the note, but they found little else. I never saw my brother again. Last year, I moved out of my parents' house, a decision driven by my desire to escape the constant moving of my furniture. I couldn't picture a life where I could leave my furniture untouched and just sleep without worrying about my mom seeing it. When I finally could afford it, I moved in with my best friend, who was aware of my furniture issues, but didn't seem too fazed. I worried that once he witnessed the reality of it, he might be frightened. The first morning I woke up in the new place, the room was a mess, everything out of place. Although I thought there wouldn't be any standard for how my room looked anymore, I was tired of fixing it. I decided to let things be for a few days. But as time went on, the chaos only increased, as if my furniture was rebelling against my neglect. I started rearranging things, but nothing too extreme, just the big stuff. My roommate was initially indifferent, but after about 2 weeks, I woke up one morning to find my bed outside on the balcony. I knew it was beginning to spiral again. The whole reason I moved out was to avoid this kind of craziness. Frustrated, I let it go for one more night, wanting to see what would happen if I left it again. The next day, I woke up in the woods with no idea where I was. It reminded me of when I was a kid and had similar experiences, but this was so much worse. It took me about 2 hours to find my way back home and figure out how to retrieve my bed. When I finally returned, my roommate wanted to talk. He confessed that he had never truly believed in the strange furniture thing, thinking it was an elaborate prank. Living with me was messing with his mental state. He felt anxious and drained, and he wanted me to move out. Although I was upset, I realized it was probably for the best. I assured him I'd start putting the furniture back in place every day and that everything would be fine, but it didn't ease his mind. I called my parents to let them know I was coming back home, and they sounded excited. They seemed genuinely happy, saying they felt better than they had in years. It was nice to hear them cheerful for the first time since my brother's disappearance. I packed up most of my things, ready to move in a few days. We knew this could complicate our friend group, so we decided to do something fun before I left, a spontaneous road trip. On the morning of my departure, I didn't bother moving any furniture back. It didn't seem necessary. Oddly enough, on the trip, my furniture didn't move at all. For the first time, I woke up to find everything in place. I thought I had stumbled upon a solution. We returned from our amazing trip feeling closer than ever, grateful for the experience. But when I walked into my room, everything was just as I had left it, except for the dresser, which was now facing the center of the room. I approached it to move it back into place, but it felt unusually heavy. A wave of dread washed over me as memories of my brother's disappearance flooded back. I hesitated, knowing something was off. I called my roommate in to help me move it. At first, he was reluctant, not wanting anything to do with my furniture issues. But eventually, I convinced him to help me lift it up quickly. As we pushed it back against the wall, a lifeless body fell out. It was a man, dead and limp, with hook marks inside the dresser. It looked like he had fallen out while hiding inside. This must have happened at the beginning of our trip, and he had been trapped ever since. He was in the same place where I had found that ominous note. He also had a tank filled with a tranquilizer connected to a mask, something meant to cover your mouth and nose before surgery. He looked malnourished and weak. This was the man who had haunted my life for the last 15 years, moving my furniture around as if it were some twisted game. He was responsible for my brother's disappearance, for taking away countless sleepovers during my childhood, and for robbing my family of peace. They never figured out who he was. They couldn't match his fingerprints, dental records, or anything else. It was as if he had never existed. They never found my brother, nor did they understand how this man had been able to sneak in and out of my home without being detected. After that day, my furniture never moved again.